Welcome to Matter of Fact, a podcast from the Roy Howard Community Journalism Center, where we report what matters. I'm your host, Halawi Tebebe. With support from the Scripps Howard Foundation, our center works to counter misinformation and strengthen truth-based journalism across communities in Southeast Mississippi. Today's episode highlights our RHCJC news article, Grassroots Effort Brings Print Newspaper Back to Lumberton. The story focuses on a community-led effort to reintroduce a local print newspaper in Lumberton, Mississippi. In this episode, we'll take a closer look at why this is relevant, especially in communities where there may be a gap in information and who it's reaching. We'll start by discussing the origins and the journey of the Lumberton Post, from its early days as a Facebook group to its first paper being issued last month. Then we'll hear from junior reporter J.C. Roberts, who played a key role in covering this story, to better understand what it reveals about the community and the process of reporting in the field. Finally, in our What is True segment, our media literacy coordinator Walker Scott will help us break down what this story teaches us about news deserts and how communities can build stronger, more inclusive local media ecosystems. In Lumberton, Mississippi, staying informed hasn't always been easy. For years, the city had no local newspaper, no central place to find updates, and no consistent way to know what was happening just down the street. That's something Leanna Dreher experienced firsthand.
I've been in Lumberton for about 10 years now. And after living here for a little while, I started to realize that I never knew what was going on in town because there was no local radio or TV station, there was no local newspaper. And so I'd drive by the community center and see lots of cars and wonder, geez, what's going on there? But how would I know, right? So I decided to start a group on Facebook called the Lumberton Post. And I took a picture of the post office because I thought it was a pretty building. And then I begged people to join the group and start posting things. I said, just consider this your little local newspaper. You can put births in here, weddings in here, whatever you want. Put your businesses in here so that people will know what's going on in town.
The Lumberton Post quickly grew into a hub for the community, with nearly 6,000 members sharing updates, announcements, and everyday moments. Amidst the growth, however, Dreher says she often wondered who was left out of that online loop and how to include them in that circle of information.
Well, my husband is really the one that initially had the idea, because he and I were talking about how people were always saying, well, not everybody's on Facebook, or maybe the logarithms aren't there, and so your posts on the Lumberton Post aren't showing up for everybody, but whatever, not everybody is seeing everything. And then I would tell him, well, how could people not know about the Lumberfest or the movie night, because we had it plastered on Facebook, so how could they not know?
We spoke with John Maroney, Executive Director of the Lumberton Main Street Association. And he says he's noticed the mixed results of solely sharing information online.
I would say digital divide is kind of like one of those things where, man, you got a lot of people that are on Facebook, you got a lot of people that are on TikTok, you got a lot of people that are on a lot of different platforms, and we felt that for at least the group of people that were not on social media, there was not a lot. And I think from a Lumberton Main Street perspective is we feel like we have really good information and we want to get good information out there to people. So if we believe that about our organization, why would we just do Facebook? Why would we just do TikTok? Can we do something like a newspaper? Can we get with news programs? Can we do carrier pigeons? Whatever that may be. And for us, it was like, wow, the next step really should be some type of newspaper, because we wanted to get good information out to people that were just maybe not on social media.
And so on March 1st of this year, the Lumberton Post became a physical newspaper. Something simple. Just 2 pages, about 100 copies across town, placed in local storefronts and businesses. But sometimes, simple works. Now, instead of hoping to see a post at the right time, you can pick it up, read it when you're ready, and even pass it on to someone else. Maroney says this is a step in the right direction for Lumberton, and hopes the Post can shine a light on the good that comes from the community.
I think one of the things, which we talked about this a lot the first time you guys came in, is pushing against that what good can come from Lumberton narrative. So interestingly enough, you guys left the Lumberton Cafe that day when we had that interview, and this man walked in, and he was like, "What are you guys doing with all those cameras? What's going on?" And I told him, we're doing a story talking about some of the good happening from Lumberton. And I kid you not, he immediately shook his head, and he's like, "Lumberton? Nothing good comes from Lumberton, ever. Nothing's ever happening in Lumberton." And I mean, it was so ironic because we had just talked about for an hour about the good things happening from Lumberton, yet there are those people that are like, nothing's good coming from Lumberton. So it was ironic and funny, but I feel like the paper in a way is like we're taking away every excuse. Like, I mean, look on Facebook, good's happening. Look on TikTok, good's happening. Look on WDAM, USM, Lumberton Post, maybe carrier pigeons, but like look everywhere. Now a newspaper in front of all these businesses. There is good happening at Lumberton. So every time people keep saying there's not, just shove something different in their face of like, hey, look at this. This is things happening in Lumberton. So like that narrative, I feel like it is disappearing slowly but surely.
Even though the paper is relatively new to the city, Maroney says he's already began to notice it in people's hands, even those just passing through.
There was a guy that I met at Chuck's, I guess maybe 2 weeks ago, and he had just moved to Lumberton. He was eating his burger at Chuck's, and guess what he had on his table flipping through? Lumberton Post. Never been in the community. He's not connected to anything on Facebook. So even if we just get one, okay, we got one, and I think we're going to get more.
Looking ahead into the future of the Lumberton Post, Dreyer says they'll need community engagement to stand the test of time.
I think that we have to get community involvement. And that has been it seems like that's been a little bit of an issue, because I think that after people have been around for a little while and they don't see any change, they get a little, I don't know if you want to call it depressed, but down, and they don't think that anything is going to change.
Similarly, Maroney says the paper has the chance to leave a long-lasting impact on the community, but it needs the community's help.
I think it could potentially bridge a gap if it works and it stays consistent. That is the big thing in Lumberton. Are things going to stay consistent? We got people all the time that are going to come around Lumberton like, hey, I want to do this big thing. It lasts for 2 months and then it fades away. Like that's kind of like how things have always worked in Lumberton. So I think if it can stay consistent, it can be, but it's kind of in that category of things that we're doing of like, is this going to stick? Because we're not going to do something just because we want to have a newspaper. We want to do it because it is going to flourish. It is going to be productive. So I think to be seen, depending on the community response to it, we'll see.
In many ways, the Lumberton Post is more than just a monthly paper. It's a response to a gap in information, and a place for local voices to be heard. Community journalism isn't just about staying updated. It's also about participation. And in Lumberton, that simple idea is bringing people back into the loop, one page at a time. The story you just heard was reported in part by RHCJC News part-time reporter J.C. Roberts. From gathering interviews to helping shape how this story came together, J.C. played a key role in highlighting what this means for the Lumberton community. He joins us now to talk about his experience reporting and what he learned in the process. So, in the initial stages of reporting, how did you go about reaching out to the Lumberton officials? Because I know this isn't the first story we've done surrounding Lumberton this semester, so kind of touch on how it was reaching back out to those contacts that you've already formed.
Originally, when we started working on stories in Lumberton this semester, I actually went on Facebook and found out the Lumberton Post community group, and from then on, I just got in contact with the admin, and from the first story ever since, we've kind of had each other's phone numbers, and we kind of just keep in contact, which is one of, the main lessons that we learn out of working here, creating those connections within the community and being able to get updates on what's going on to recycle that news coverage kind of.
So I know that in your interviews you spoke with Dreyer, and, she talked about not knowing what was happening in the town before creating that Facebook group. How did hearing that shape your understanding of the role of local journalism?
It just shows how important it is what we do, kind of being in those areas, in those like underrepresented communities, and just kind of understanding people and what they're going through. with Lumberton, they're already going through like a revitalization stage, and they've had eras where they've had like no economic development director and things like that, and they're just slowly building up like their Main Street Association. So, um, it just shows that like making sure those voices are heard is like very, very important, especially in those smaller communities.
What do you think it says about a community like Lumberton that, you know, not only was the Facebook group created out of necessity, but it's turned into something that, you know, hopefully will be displayed across the city. So what do you think it says about Lumberton and the community that, you know, people are pitching in to make this idea a reality?
I would say the message there is, it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. It's about those people that are in those communities that want to see the community do better. They want to see the community grow. They want to make sure that everybody is informed on what's going on, I would say.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And I know we talked about Dreyer, but you also spoke with John Maroney, who is over the Main Street Association, the Lumberton Main Street Association. I wanted to see if you could talk about how their perspectives were the same or how they differed, and maybe how they complemented each other in shaping the story.
Well, with John, he's like that fresh face that kind of eliminates that pessimism within Lumberton, and with, you know, some people in their community. He's originally from Poplarville, so his perspective is he comes from a different area who already has a negative stigma, and now living in that area, he wants to see it do better, which is pretty similar to Dreyer's response. But he's more in that like bigger position of power because he's like the Main Street Association executive director, so he makes a lot of these like big moves, like making sure they have facade grants and making sure things like a newspaper going on, making sure that they're hosting big events to keep people engaged. With Dreyer, she is a resident and she also is a secretary of the Main Street Association, but she has like more of that perspective of, oh, I've been living here and there's nothing going on. She also connects well to that older generation not really having social media and stuff.
Yeah.
Even though she did start things on social media, she kind of has that perspective because she's always like, oh, John is so technically savvy. So like we reach out to him so he can be able to do those things online that we don't know how to do, and those technology type things.
Yeah, I would say like, you know, kind of like the background of it. Yeah.
Exactly. And that kind of helped her also understand how important that is to have like those outlets for people that don't know how to use social media, things like that, I would say.
So we're talking about, you know, that transition from digital spaces to print. So from your perspective, why do you think that transition matters for a community like Lumberton? You know, considering that newspapers are outdated, quote unquote, or, you know, not the most common form of news. So why is it important for smaller communities to maybe shift their focus from digital spaces back to print?
That transition is actually very important. Kind of like Dreyer told me, she was somebody who didn't really understand social media. So even when she did build that from the ground up, the social media and the engagement, and it gained 6,000 members as of today, she instantly thought about, wait a second, what about those people who don't have internet access? What about those people who just aren't really very fond of like using social media? What about those people who are more old-fashioned, who want to roll out a newspaper and kind of see what's going on within their communities? Because she said that even though she would post every day, every week, her and John, there were still so many people like, oh, we don't even know what's going on in Lumberton. Like, oh, we didn't hear about that. We wanted to come. Nobody told us anything. We didn't hear anything. And she's like, how do y'all not know this is on social media?
Yeah.
And she even told us that herself, she feels like she's gotten so intact with social media now that sometimes she has to like take a step back and understand that not everybody is using this, especially in the area where I feel like the ages kind of balance out a little bit, but there might be older generations that are more prevalent, you know,
Right.
staying in that area.
And so with a newspaper like this, you know, the community involvement is very crucial. And I remember from the interviews, you know, John Maroney talking about how community buy-in is crucial. And, we work at a community journalism center, so what we do is very closely tied to the work that they're trying to accomplish at the Lumberton Post. And, we are closely tied in with our partners and other organizations that do work like us. And that's very important to our success. So, looking forward for the Lumberton community, would you say that there is hope for the Post to actually be sustainable within the community? And what would that take? What does that require?
I would say that there definitely is hope, and it just requires an involved community, involved residents that want to know what's going on, residents that want to see their communities do better, residents that don't want to keep that pessimism sitting where it is, people that just want to see change. John was just so grateful to have Leanna and like her concerns when she first moved to Lumberton, and kind of put that word out there and make sure that people have what they need in their communities without having to do too much. Having a public newspaper, being able to, if they do, being able to get on their phones and swipe up and see, oh, what's going on? I want to go to this. So I just feel like having those people who just want to see their community do better. That even ties into like businesses. If you have a business you just open, get on there, contribute to your business and marketing your city where you live at, and let people know that they have an outlet, they have a business they can come to, they can spend money to, they have a business they can invest in. Because, as John said, if you're not doing that, then you're not helping your own business.
It's not just about the fact that there is a paper now, it's about what you can accomplish with it, right? So it is an outlet for the community rather than just a piece of news, or rather just a piece of information.
Exactly. And having the content is just as important. Giving to the content is just as important as having the content. So
what do you mean by that? Just clarify on that a little bit.
You got to be willing to give in order to like receive and help things like grow. So overall, they want it to be published like professionally, but if people aren't supporting what they put out, then how are they going to accomplish that?
And that makes a lot of sense, tying it back into a paper for the community, by the community. So obviously the community's involvement is going to be crucial to its longevity. JC Roberts, thank you for your reporting and for helping us understand the grassroots of the revitalization of Lumberton. Now it's time for What is True, our fact-checking segment where we break down common claims, talk about how to verify them, and give you the tools to spot what's real. Joining us is Walker Scott, our What is True Media Literacy Coordinator. Walker is over our fact-checking investigations and leads the center's Ask Me What is True community media literacy trainings. Walker, when we look at a story like the Lumberton Post, what does media literacy help us understand about gaps in local information ecosystems?
Media literacy helps us see not just what information exists, but who has access to it and who doesn't. In a story like this, the gap isn't necessarily a lack of information altogether, it's a lack of accessible and centralized information. When updates are scattered across platforms or limited to one channel like social media, entire groups of people can be unintentionally excluded. Media literacy encourages us to ask, where is information being shared? Who is it reaching? And just as importantly, who is being left out?
So this story highlights how some residents were left out of online spaces. What does that tell us about the limitations of relying solely on social media for news?
It shows that social media, while powerful, isn't universal. Not everyone uses it, not everyone trusts it, and algorithms ultimately control what people see. That means even if important information is posted, there's no guarantee it actually reaches the people who need it. Media literacy teaches us that distribution matters just as much as content. If your entire information system depends on one platform, especially one driven by engagement rather than public service, then it's inherently limited.
How can communities recognize when they're experiencing a news desert, and what are some signs that listeners should look for?
A news desert doesn't always mean there's no information. It often means there's no reliable, consistent source of local information. Some signs include people frequently saying, "I didn't know that was happening," a lack of coverage on local government or community events, and heavy reliance on word of mouth or social media rumors. If there's no single place where residents can go to stay informed about their local community, that's a strong indicator of a gap in the local information system.
What are some ways that listeners can verify community information they see in Facebook groups or other social media spaces?
The first step is to pause before sharing. Then look for confirmation. Ask, is this information coming from a primary source like a city official or organization or someone directly involved? Can it be verified through another channel like a website, public notice, or direct contact? It's also important to check timing. Is the information current or is it being reshared out of context? Media literacy is about slowing down and verifying before amplifying.
For listeners in similar communities, like Lumberton, what are practical steps that they can take to support or even start their own local information networks?
Start by identifying the gap. What information is missing and who isn't being reached? From there, it can be as simple as organizing information in one consistent place, whether that's a newsletter, a bulletin board, or a small print publication like the Lumberton Post. Collaboration is key. Involving local businesses, community leaders, and residents helps distribute both the workload and the reach. And most importantly, consistency matters. Even small efforts can grow into something impactful if they're reliable and community-driven.
The audio essay discussed how important it is to have consistent, accessible information. Why is consistency such a key factor in building trust in local journalism?
Consistency builds expectation. When people know where and when to find information, it becomes part of their routine. That reliability is what builds trust over time. If information appears sporadically and unpredictably, people are less likely to depend on it. Media literacy reminds us that trust isn't just about accuracy, it's also about dependability. A consistent source, even a small one, signals to a community that someone is committed to keeping them informed.
That's what is true, with Media Literacy Coordinator Walker Scott. You can learn more about the program or submit a question of your own at rhcjcnews.com/WITREQ or by calling 601-266-TRUE. That's 601-266-8783. This episode was adapted from our RHCJC news story, Grassroots Effort Brings Print Newspaper Back to Lumberton. A special thanks to the team behind the story, videographer Nick Sharma, and of course, junior student reporter J.C. Roberts, who we heard from earlier in the show. You can read the full story and explore related reporting at rhcjcnews.com. Be sure to follow us on social media at RHCJC News to keep up with more stories just like this one. As always, thank you for listening and for spending time with us as we take you behind the scenes of the Roy Howard Community Journalism Center. I'm Halawi Tabebe, and this is Matter of Fact.